of dialogue is to hold and care for the wholeness of the process in the midst of the turmoil of conflictual otherness. And this is what is dearest to me, and where I see the highest potential for dialogue, and why dialogue is so crucial also for the development of the democracy, as you're talking about.
Welcome back to Integral Voices, convened and produced by the Center for Transformative Learning at Meridian University. I'm Aftab Omer, and I'm glad to be in conversation with Thomas Steininger on today's episode. It is our care that creates new worlds, dialogic capability amidst cultural crisis. Thomas Steininger is a philosopher and educator based in Frankfurt, Germany, who publishes the German magazine Evolve, and is the host of Radio Evolve, which publishes both in German and English. He's the co-developer of the emergent dialogue process, which we explore further in this conversation. Integral Voices is a video and audio podcast found on all podcast platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts, as well as YouTube. To stay updated on upcoming episodes and to explore the archive, visit meridianuniversity.edu/Integral Voices. And now on to my conversation with Thomas Steininger. Hello, Thomas.
Hello, Aftab. Great to be with you. Very much enjoy the opportunity to talk.
Welcome to Integral Voices, Thomas. I'm glad to continue the conversation we began on Radio Evolve. I'm also aware you have just returned from, last night in fact, from Stockholm, where you were co-hosting a gathering on collective sense-making.
That's right, yeah.
So that aligns so well with what our intentions have been in terms of a part 2 of our conversation on convening the Dialogic Commons.
Mm-hmm.
So Thomas, perhaps we can begin with a better sense of your own journey to dialogue. You grew up in Austria. You got a doctorate at the University of Vienna. Your doctoral dissertation was on Heidegger or drew on Heidegger's work.
Mm-hmm.
Where would be a good point to pick up on this journey for our purposes today?
I mean, maybe this is a good starting point, because part of the motivation and the work of my thesis was it was not just based on Martin Heidegger. It was also based on Ken Wilber's work, which is a very unusual combination. And the motive behind was an interest in the coherence between inner and outer development, inner spiritual development and outer social political development. And this kind of integration from the inner and outer is a part of what was also driving this interest in how do we come together. A central starting point, of course, was a radical spiritual experiment that was part of, was the Enlightened Next community that Andrew Cohen, the time spiritual teacher, was leading, where we were in the beginning of the 90s, in fact in California first, and then in New England, experimenting how can we go beyond our postmodern self-centeredness in our hyper-individuated psychology that we are so immersed in, and how can we come together in consciousness in something that is beyond that and deeper than that. And we did a lot of collective spiritual practice, and this was in fact the starting point of this work. And to make it very short, we learned a lot of things, how things can go wrong. And we also had, at least the way how we experienced it, breakthroughs to an experience of something being alive between human beings that's beyond our separate self-sense, but very concrete, very real. It's not just being one with the universe. It's something that has a living quality between present human beings. And this experience kind of triggered also my further investigation later on here in Germany, together with my partner, Elisabeth de Bold, and people around here. How can this be something that is important for our personal development, our collective development, but also, if I may say so, the evolution of culture?
Thomas, you began with speaking about the inner and the outer. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, what goes with the term inner in this context?
My inner awareness of presence, being aware right now in this conversation that I am with you, Aftab, that there is a certain relationship between us, there's a friendship, there's an excitement of this opportunity to talk, and these are all inner experiences. I also could describe, you are sitting in LA, I'm sitting in Frankfurt in Germany, we are in a certain political time, we have a certain background in education and whatever, but there is something that has an inner reality, and how does this inner reality and this outer reality integrate to a united reality, and how can we not only think that, but experience that and live that?
This mysterious relationship between the inner and the outer is served through dialogue. Mm-hmm. So I'm glad we have begun where we have. What was your experience of the inquiry that became the doctoral dissertation?
I mean, in the doctoral dissertation very much came from, at that time, usual postmodern psychological Jungian therapeutic understanding of reality and the political consciousness that I had, and my desire to bring, let's call, inner psychological consciousness and political consciousness to something that has a unified reality. And at that time, it was just, I think, what many of us did in this generation in many places. And it was just one attempt amongst millions, I guess. What I found more striking is what came afterwards, the realization that the dominant paradigm, our psychological paradigm, that basically is the paradigm of our times, our cultural context, which allowed us to dive into inner worlds, basically starting with the psychological breakthrough in the beginning of the last century with deep psychology, with Freud, with Jung, with James, people like that, that this opened something up in society that allowed us, in difference to the generation before, to have an inner sense of reality. That was a tremendous breakthrough, but it also had a hyper-individual limitation. So in the inner world was perceived through a paradigm of individuality that has its necessity, because there's a lot of truth to that. But it also, just to cut it very short, has a lot to do with the narcissistic reality of our times, where we are very incapable to see beyond self-reference. Because everything is basically very much related in this psychological self-referencing. How does this relate to my inner personal experience, which, again, is important, a breakthrough, but a limitation. And I think the dialogical approach is an approach to respond to that. One other way to talk about the same thing, one of the breakthroughs of our times is the mindfulness revolution. And one can talk a lot about what the mindfulness revolution brought. Just 15 years ago, mindfulness was a fringe happening on some esoteric new age outsides. Now it's center stage in business, in many parts of society. There is something where our usual subject-object relationship of reality wants to be counteracted by something that has mindfulness. But again, mindfulness is embedded very much in this individual perspective of reality. Also, our meditation practices, our therapeutic practices are very much based on that. And what is happening right now, where I see a whole new emerging situation of V-space experiments, collective sense-making experiments, what we said also in the beginning, one could also interpret, and I think that is rightfully interpreted this way, as a mindfulness 2.0. You could call it collective mindfulness. So what we are talking about, dialogue, V-space, collective sense-sensing, has a lot to do with collective mindfulness, which is a step further than the mindfulness as we know it.
I'm recalling that Freud at one point spoke about, in speaking about childhood primary narcissism, he spoke about his majesty, the baby. Mm-hmm. So as this self-centeredness decenters, mm-hmm. we become more and more capable of dialogue. If we could just again return to your own journey as a person, as a learner, as an educator, as a practitioner, on that journey, your journey as an intellectual, on that journey, at some point, dialogue, the idea and practice of dialogue, becomes important. Where on that journey does that happen, and what is the surrounding context?
There are several starting points, but one starting point was this radical experiment in the Latinx community. And in fact, dialogue is a kind of a term that at least could lead to misunderstanding, because there are different ways of dialogue or understanding of dialogue that I find interesting. And I'm very interested in making distinctions in dialogue and V-spaces, because dialogue is something that we also can do in a very hyper-individuated context, where I'm fully myself and I am basically aware of your being fully in yourself, and there's something in exchange between this uniqueness of your selfness and myself, which is a beautiful thing, but it emphasizes again the separate uniqueness and selfness. What I'm interested in, and maybe dialogue is not the best word to talk about it, but in another way, it is a very, very good way, is that when we come together, when we talk as we do right now, this in exchange between us holds our uniqueness, and this is important and stays so, but there is also something where we are opening up an undivided presence between us and even beyond us, because our dialogue is embedded in a bigger presence, maybe the presence of our physical surroundings, maybe our cultural surroundings. This is embedded, and there's a coming together of a wholeness that we, with our sensuality, with our intelligence, can dive into and explore. And there is a different form of coming together that goes beyond separation. That is the sweet spot that I find most interesting in this new form of dialogue.
There's a whole dimension here of participation and a particular understanding of the participatory nature of thought.
Mm-hmm.
Can we pick up this connection then between dialogue and thinking?
Mm-hmm.
There is thinking that we could distinguish as dialogic thinking.
I think we have to step back here also and think about what do we mean with thinking. Because our understanding of thinking is also cultured in a very specific modern way, where thinking is an object-oriented, rational, calculating process that has a certain understanding of what it is. That's, for example, very different than what medieval thinking was, or very different what ancient Greek thinking was, and even more different what archaic Greek or kind of archaic thinking itself was. It's very interesting that when you hear even early Greek thinkers and ask, so where do we think? Where is the soul? Usually those cultures point to the heart, not to the brain. So there was something involved in the thinking process that is not just the brain quality, but you could call it the heart quality. There's something where thinking and being is not separate, where thinking is not just an abstract kind of going through the mechanics of logic, but it is an speaking to reality and bringing into words our perceptions and trying to create understanding and meaning and reasoning about this. And I find it important when we say, so what's the relationship between dialogue and thinking, that we go beyond the kind of functional technical thinking that we have highly developed in our academics culture, not only academic, also in our business and business and science culture as such. Thinking has to be more to really open up these dimensions.
And perhaps for our purposes today, we could distinguish that as transactional thinking, mm-hmm. and dialogic thinking. And so we are thinking together right now, you and I. And not only are we thinking together, we are speaking. We are speaking our thinking. So we're not writing emails to each other. Mm-hmm. And that there's something that goes with speaking thinking, where we are also enhanced in that intention by being able to see each other, mm-hmm. and see how our speech affects the other and calls out, evokes more speaking thinking from the other.
it just brings, as you're saying, the multidimensionality of reality into this exchange that we are having. It's not just the exchange of abstracted wording, but this wording is embedded in an awareness of each other in pre-verbal, even if we are meeting on Zoom, we are meeting thousands of miles apart, but we are in our shared presence. There's something where very subtle parts of our togetherness respond to each other. And this wholeness is part in the way we conduct this conversation, how we relate to each other, so that there's much more part of this conversation than just what you can write in writing this way. I mean, very artful writing can do a lot also, not to take away that, but there's something in this face-to-face meeting that highlights these other dimensions. And also one thing I would like to bring to dialogue, because it kind of relates also to what I really like about the idea of dialogue. Because usually the way we use the word dialogue is it's the interaction between two people. That's how it's kind of dialogue, trialogue in this thing, and it's fair enough to understand it this way. But dialogue originally, from the Greek source, was meant, it comes from Greek theater, and it was logos coming through, dialogos. And logos was the Greek word for meaning. So dialogos is also in a shared process to allow meaning to come through. And not the exchange of meaning, but the meaning to come through. So there's something between, we are weaving meaning together. There's already, of course, it has your part, it has my part, and if other people are part of it, even if you just listen to it, it's the listening is part of the weaving. For the people listening, they are part for themselves in this dialogue. It's a weaving of meaning, and this weaving of meaning is a unified process that can be aware of itself. So what we can do in dialogue, and what I find so beautiful in dialogue, is that we focus on this shared weaving process and see what comes in, and look for its beauty, look for its shining, look for its meaningfulness, and don't know together where this shows up. Meaning itself guides us where it wants to go with us.
Your and my challenge today is being dialogic in our inquiry about dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
So the meta is at a second order.
Yeah.
I'm also reminded, as you were speaking about logos, that legein refers to a revealing. So we are engaging in an emergent meaning through a process of revealing that you and I are by necessity surrendering to. That we don't have a specific plan for our conversation. We have some shared intentions. And as our conversation deepens, we can look forward to a revealing that emerges as shared meaning, shared knowing.
No, I agree, and then it's interesting. So, what is showing up here, and why is it showing up? And the way I understand it is our shared interest in, let's call it, the meaning of dialogue. And one way I understand it, and it seems to resonate with what you are saying, is this shared interest in how meaning shows up in dialogue has its own dynamics. because I would like to understand how meaning unfolds. Being with you, I'm with you with all your backgrounds, everything you stand on as a person, where you come from, who you are, your personality, your growing up, your culture, and same vice versa. And here we are talking. What is weaving between us is all our kind of backgrounds of understanding of what is meaning. And there's also the longing, we need to come together as humanity in the end. But it's also, if you don't want to start speak in any kind of setting, we need to come together to create meaning together in order to not go against each other. We have, in order to really thrive as humanity, we have to create shared meaning. So if that's the case, this is an opportunity to just be open and see where there is a resonance of meaning and work it together. And for example, in our shared interest, what is dialogue, and hearing what you're saying about dialogue, you deepen my understanding of what this is, what we are doing. And through the conversation that we're having right now, I deepen my own understanding of what this work is about. It's an ongoing diving into, okay, dialogue, what is this? In my understanding, it is the openness for meaning to show up. And to be open, that there's another human being with his heart, with his mind, with his experience. If I listen to you and see where we find resonance, a synergy is happening in our understanding that allows us to weave something that is beyond what I am able to weave on my own.
So far, we've used the phrase shared interests. And as you're speaking, the term caring is emerging, that there's a mutuality of caring that is driving our conversation. That our interest in dialogue is rooted in a shared caring for what is happening in the world at this time. What is happening to democracy at this time.
Interesting that you bring democracy in, because that's where this is most needed right now. And maybe to make a point that I think is important here, the caring is most important where I least understand you. Where we talk and for me, what you're saying doesn't make sense, or I even dislike it. I have reactions to it. And there's all going on, and I have this possibility to turn against you and basically change dialogue into a debate or even worse. But the care that you are talking about is that all this can be true. All my feelings, I don't understand you, it doesn't make sense, I feel the other is stupid or whatever, maybe all be there, but I care about the fact that we are together in something, and I'm interested to understand and create understanding. And in this care, a dialogue becomes extremely creative. And interesting enough, exactly at the points where there's the least understanding, if we care enough, the likelihood of creative insights is the highest. Because if we think the same all the time anyway, there is great, we feel fantastic, what a great conversations we had, and you are great, and I am great, and the talk was great, all good, but nothing really changed. But if I don't understand you and you don't understand me, but we care for each other and we care for the meaning of creating that we're doing, and we lean into this discomfort of that doesn't make sense what the other is saying or whatever, the likelihood that something breaks open that I haven't thought about and you haven't thought about, but we together in this synergy of our thought process emerges, is highest. And that's part of the power of dialogue. And that's so desperately needed in democracy right now, because we're experiencing in this process of polarization exactly the opposite.
We could say that true democracy depends on dialogic inquiry, dialogic practice, and dialogic capability. On your journey, there were likely milestones, turning points, where your dialogic capability took a leap into more structure, more complexity.
Interesting. Two things come to my mind that are on the opposite side of each other. One is the experience of meditation. Because, and that sounds strange when we talk about dialogue, but the practice of meditation, at least the way I would suggest to understand it, is the deep conscious awareness of letting go of everything I know and being fully aware in this not knowing. And this capacity, if I at least have some muscles in that, to let go of what I think is true, what is right, and what angers me, and what I love, just letting go and being here and being present and relaxed, opens up something that allows me to go in a different way into dialogue that is not so invested in who I think I am and what I think is true. That this capacity of being at peace with the mystery of presence.
Mindfulness practice in various forms, including sitting meditation, trains attention. And this attentional competency is then available in the service of caring and thinking together about a concern where there is mutual caring. And so all of that would serve democracy when there is this capability of bringing speech, mobilizing speech through a mutual focus on a particular challenge and a particular conflict.
Yeah. Now, as you're talking about conflict, that is also the other side of what was very important for my learning in this, when I was talking about the capacity of meditation and not knowing and holding the mystery. And the other side of it that I learned also in painful ways is the capacity to stay in multiplicity, let's call it this way. And to allow that multiplicity does not have to be resolved right away. So when we are talking, for example, just to use again our conversation for simplicity case, that we stay in something and I appreciate your otherness. And I don't have to resolve it. I don't have to integrate you in my context, but I appreciate also in that we are that we are together in something, even if I can't name it, and in that to allow something third to show up. There's a synergetic power in dialogue where when we allow the differences to be themselves and they don't let us fall apart. We don't separate in this. We even if it's difficult, we stick to the wholeness of our process and to the care for this. Then a synergetic power opens up in this. There's no guarantee for nothing. Doesn't need to. But the chance that synergy happens where very diverse, conflictual, different perspectives synergize to something that holds together and creates something different is just likely to happen, or more likely to happen. And part of the art of dialogue is to stay with that and have also the soul maturity, also the interest in the other and otherness as a whole, things I don't understand, so that out of this shared interest, we deepen insight. And it's an art that needs my soul, needs my intellect, it needs my relationship with you, in order to not kind of say, no, I don't like it, I don't understand it, it doesn't make sense, or you trigger some trigger point in myself. The art of dialogue is to hold and care for the wholeness of the process in the midst of the turmoil of conflictual otherness. And this is what is dearest to me, and where I see the highest potential for dialogue, and why dialogue is so crucial also for the development of the democracy, as you're talking about.
If good dialogue is not being locked into a perspective,
mm-hmm.
then we could ask ourselves, what is dialogic practice? What is its ability to unlock, to help unlock each other out of the perspectives we get locked into?
Mm-hmm. To bring another word in that I think is important here, what we need to develop our democracy and culture is a higher capacity for complexity. And I think dialogue helps our capacity to hold higher forms of complexity, because we hold all different parts of the different pieces of wholeness, let's say, and connecting with you as we are doing right now, and connecting with you at all the levels of caring for each other, caring for the situation. There is an openness to the part of the complexity that you are holding that I am not capable of holding myself. But in my connection with you, and in connection with the wholeness of the situation that we are in, there's a capacity to find resonance with parts of reality that otherwise I don't have access to. So the care of the dialogue allows me to open up and resonate with parts of complexity that on my own I'm not capable of entering. And what we need in our world, amongst other things, and maybe one of the most crucial things, is our capacity to handle higher forms of complexity. And one, let's call it working hypothesis, is we cannot do this on our own. We need each other for that. There is, let's call it distributed wisdom. And distributed wisdom happens when maybe I have some wisdom, you have wisdom, others have wisdom, when we allow to bring this together and out of care for the dialogical process, allow our wisdoms to synergize and have the soul capacity to do so. Then a wisdom arises that is distributed because it holds all the parts that we are holding, but it also resonates because we resonate as we're talking right now. And this is true in a single conversation as we're having in this moment. But I would say it's true also on big scale in questions of how we hold democracy, how we hold intercultural dialogues, how we create a global future. Capacities to hold all the different parts of complexity that we cannot hold our own. How can we do this? Through finding forms of finding resonance. And the main form of resonance is the practice of dialogue.
I'm aware, Thomas, that in your work with Elizabeth Diebold and the network, the communities that you and Elizabeth are working in, which is a dialogic commons, where dialogic practice is deepening. Mm-hmm. And so it's an example. I'm wondering what you could say that would specify some of the features of this convening that has occurred in your and Elizabeth's work.
Some of the features depends on what features we are talking about. I mean, the work, part of the work, and maybe that's the part of the work that you're also pointing to, is intercultural dialogue. And we use also the capacity of the internet and Zoom to bring people together that usually are not in the situation to have personal conversation with each other. And that creates something that creates a gateway to other worlds, a mutual gateway to other worlds. Because it's very different to hear about what's going on in other cultures. And other cultures can be white supremacist culture, or it can be African traditional culture, or whatever culture we don't have access to. When we are able to create contexts where there is a gateway to each other, and where there is the soul capacity and the consciousness capacity to hold this gateway open, something happens between these differences of these worlds. They come together, and it's the human connection that brings them together. So the feature that I see is in real relationships that needs a real face-to-face, and that can be also via Zoom, face-to-face, in communities where you still can talk to each other, where not hundreds of people are watching something, but let's say 10 people are talking to each other. It can be 30 people. Something is happening that brings different worlds together. And that's a feature that we, I think, have to develop right now to go beyond our self-centeredness, but also to go beyond our cultural bias to an active practice of dialogical spaces. And I think out of necessity, what our world needs, there are a lot of practices opening up. They're trying to attempt to reach this, and there's a lot of knowledge created right now. And what we're doing is one experiment amongst others.
The term commons is typically invoked in relation to natural resources. Mm-hmm. How shall we care for the land? How shall we care for the air, for the water, and so on? And when we connect dialogue with commons, we are still talking about caring for a particular resource. Mm-hmm. And perhaps we could imagine that resource that we are preserving and protecting to have to do with culture and the ways in which culture is the output of collective experience. Mm-hmm. You could also say culture as an output, as a manifestation of collective sense-making. Mm-hmm.
And maybe culture being one of the most pristine commons that we have. The culture is who we are as human beings. Because if we understand our humanness, we, in our individuality, are a particular expression of a commons called culture in all its different facets that we have developed over the last 200,000 years. And when we have an understanding of our humanness, where we can relate to the wholeness and the commons of this, there's one human experience that you also can call human culture, that is in itself not static. It's a process that is evolving, that goes through different cultural stages, and we can talk about all of this. But it's one multifaceted process that is us. And our conversation that we're having right now is just one tiny bit of an expression of this process forming itself. And we can understand our dialogue basically as my consciousness meeting your consciousness, and that's all okay. But if you understand it, yes, it's all true, but we are part of everything that makes us human. And that's a commons that doesn't belong to you, that doesn't belong to me. We can be in service of that as we are talking right now. Then this conversation is tapping into everything that makes our conversation possible, including the commons of the English language that we're using right now, that you haven't invented and I haven't invented. It's not my first language, it's not your first language. And everything that allows us to speak here, but also that what we are talking for. I mean, I talk with you just because I cherish you very much as a human being, and I cherish our friendship. But our friendship is also an expression of our capacity of humans to be friends with each other. And how can we live that together? There's a different perspective, and then dialogue becomes an expression of a resource called culture, language, meaning, and our particular meeting is very much related to these commons. And I like this perspective very much because it gives it a depth and a breadth that I think is important.
And you and I are taking this time today. It's Monday morning in California. It's Monday evening in Frankfurt. We're taking this time because something is at stake, which has to do with the fact that we're in the midst of a cultural crisis, where there are very few examples. If we go to the newspapers, if we go to YouTube and the internet generally, there are very few examples of deep and true dialogue, where understanding is growing and therefore the possibilities of co-creation would grow. In fact, you and I were recently in a meeting, in a project we share, where co-creation is the intention, and we are, to some degree, struggling in enacting our shared intentions to co-create. So we're in the midst of a cultural crisis, and we become aware when we move to co-create that our dialogic practice and our dialogic capability are at a particular threshold. And that we will need more dialogic capability than we have right now, individually and collectively. Where is our dojo then to deepen our practice of dialogic?
there are many, and there are communities of practice, of dialogical practice in different ways, and they are emerging, and they are also diverse. And the internet also creates a whole new dimension to that, because all of a sudden it's very easy to have a deep, heartfelt conversation between Frankfurt and Los Angeles, face to face, and that is something that's unbelievable. So people of good spirit who are longing for this have much easier way to find each other. And there are technologies developing how to do this, and the learning processes. I mean, what we are doing, Elizabeth and myself, what we call emergent dialogue, is a process that tries to develop principles and practice forms that allow to create skills that help people to go beyond their silo identity and open up to the dialogical openness of any situation, and create a gravity shift, because there's also a kind of a dynamics to this. When you are very isolated or in conflict situation, you have a conflict of confrontation or a conflict of reasserting identity. But when you develop an atmosphere of dialogue, there is a vortex of coming together. That interesting itself, and that's at least how I experience it. When it meets, when it goes over a threshold, the critical point is which it becomes self-sustaining. That even people who have difficulties to step into the dialogical process are taken by this vortex of communality. There's something emerging that is a supporting force that is held by people who are caring for dialogical processes. So you put the care into it, but at a certain point, the care gains its own momentum, and it's kind of, it starts to fly. It's at least the sense of it.
And is there a map of this journey emerging, this journey where individuals and collectives get better and better with emergent dialogue in particular?
A map in which sense?
Where, for example, let's say in a martial arts dojo, there is a map, and which enables a developmental hierarchy in the color of the belt in the dojo to establish there's a practice, that particular martial arts practice, and it has thresholds of capability. So map in that sense, so that as we're both in part educators, and also in various ways, we are engaged in the dojo experience. You have also taught at Meridian University, so we've shared students in that way. Is there a way for us to identify the thresholds on this journey?
Oh, very, very much so, and we could talk a lot about this. Just a very simple map that I find very helpful, just for the purpose of investigating what maps are here. One map, when we look into V spaces, to see that, because everyone thinks a V space, yeah, I know what a V space is. Because we are all in V spaces, and that's true. But to understand a V space is not a V space. I mean, it's not the same thing. And to make one simple distinction, which is a simple map, to make the difference between what I would call a pre-individuated V space, an individuated V space, and a trans-individuated V space. and that there are two different things. A pre-individual space, which, for example, we have in our indigenous past, all of us, is where we so much embedded in tribe and nature that oneness just rules in that, which is very powerful. It's part of our romantic desire to go back to this. What we usually don't see that, yes, there is this powerful oneness in this, but there's also no way out. Literally so, because people who leave the tribe die psychologically, and by the way, also economically. So there's something, and also groupthink, where basically we don't have our individual capacity to criticize and say, wait a moment, I think it differently, are their own thing. And a hooligan we is also a form of a we, in fact, a very powerful. So, but there are also very positive pre-individual we forms. It's not just hooligan. So to see this is an individuated we spaces where we relate person to person to person to person. I hear you, you hear me. It's very powerful. And it's a we space, but it's very interpersonal, related to just the I, you, and you relationship, and the network and systems of all of this, which is a powerful we space. It has its own dynamic that is powerful, and it allows me also to say, well, this is me, and I experience this different than you, and then we can work it out. And this, all what our postmodern culture developed is, this is highly individuated we space, and it's powerful. But it's very much related to my separate self-sense, and also very much holding on to this and relating to you, to your separate self-sense. And what I would call a trans-individual we space is something where we are aware of wholeness and we are aware of individuation. And as we have the capacity, which I want to say this, we have the capacity and power for separation. That's powerful. To say, no, I don't go with this. I think different is not necessarily a bad thing. It's a powerful individuated, since I can take responsibility to see things different way, in my way. But to bring this choice, this individual choice, to the recognition of there's also an embedded wholeness that we are in, that I freely, as an individual, as a highly individual person, can choose, creates a very different we space than a pre-individual we space or an individual. There's a very different dynamic in this. And just to investigate in the differences and how they unfold, and in my thinking, the higher capacity of a trans-individual we space is a part of a map that's really worth investigating, look into. I'm just naming it right now, but there's a lot what one could talk about. And there are maps. And in fact, by practicing, we're all learning maps. And it's very important to talk about this. And maybe, I mean, it's maybe a little too rigid, but you could also bring belts to that, because it needs something to use your individuality to go beyond it, transcend and include.
I'm aware, as you're speaking, Thomas, of the ways in which your thinking, your speaking, and caring are all coming together, are all are synergizing. Your thinking, your caring, your speaking. All those dimensions of your being are coming together in a beautiful way. And I'm so glad that you have chosen to care for the world in this way.
I think it is our care that creates new worlds. And I just appreciate to have this conversation with you, because I just know it's a shared care that we are having. And that's, by the way, is very inspiring and very heartening.
It is our care that creates new worlds. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you, Aftab.
Thanks for joining us. Integral Voices is produced by the Center for Transformative Learning at Meridian University. All episodes are available at meridianuniversity.edu/Integral Voices. For more information about Meridian, including upcoming public courses, other podcasts, and information sessions, visit meridianuniversity.edu. See you next time.